Hello, Dark Reader, and welcome to the Dark Side of the Library podcast. My name is Katie. Today on this minisode, I wanted to talk about a book that has been on my TBR list for a while, and I finally had the opportunity to dive right into it. It was a plummet into a fever dream, let me tell you. So the book is Monarch by Candice Wuehle. This came out March 29th of 2022. It's pretty new. Before we journey into madness, let me just remind you that if you are interested in any of the books that we do showcase, we do have our darksideofthelibrary.com website where you can find a whole list of books over there. They do have affiliate links. Make sure to join us on our Amazon Live channel. That is at amazon.com/live/darksideofthelibrary. We'd love to see you there. We live stream all the time. If you love the Halloween aesthetic, this is probably up your alley. Now, we will continue forward with Monarch. This wasn't a book that lots of people were looking at. The cover of the book really drew me in, and the actual summary of the story. So the cover is a Barbie's face, but it's smeared, so it looks strange anyway. It's very vibrant and colorful, and it just, I don't know, there's something about it that was just like, what is going on here? And then the summary. So let me tell you about the summary first. We'll talk about Candice Wuehle, and then I'm going to talk about the book from my perspective. All right, so here is the summary of the story. After waking up with a strange taste in her mouth and mysterious bruises, former child pageant star Jessica Klink unwittingly begins an investigation into a nefarious deep state underworld. Equipped with the eccentric education of her father, Dr. Klink, a professor of boredom studies and the founder of an elite study group known as the Devil's Workshop, Jessica uncovers a disquieting connection between her former life as a beauty queen and an offshoot of Project MKUltra known as Monarch. As Jessica moves closer to the truth, she begins to suspect the involvement of everyone around her, including her own mother, Greta, a Norwegian pageant queen turned occult American wellness guru for suburban housewives. With the help of Christine, her black lipsticked riot girl babysitter and confidant, Jessica sets out to take down Project Monarch. More importantly, she must discover if her first love, fellow teen queen Veronica Marshall, was genuine or yet another deep state plant. Merging iconic true crime stories of the 90s, such as Lorena Bobbitt, Nicole Brown Simpson, and JonBenet Ramsey, with theories of human consciousness, folklore, and perennial cultural fixation with dead girls, this book questions the shadow sides of self-concept. Who are you if you don't know yourself? So there's a lot going on, obviously, in the summary of the book, but that is, there's so much going on. So let me just talk about Candice real quick. Candice has written more than just Monarch. She's actually written 3 collections of poetry. She's written a lot of literature. So Candice holds an MA in literature from University of Minnesota, as well as a MFA in poetry from Iowa Writers Workshop. And she earned a doctorate in creative writing at the University of Kansas. Her studies focus on the relationship between trauma, memory, and, well, the occult. So, how to talk about Monarch. This is the weirdest book I think I've ever read. For me, it was incredibly fast-paced. It was literally as if somebody was writing a stream of consciousness on a piece of paper, but it wasn't entirely disjointed. We start the first half of the book following Jessica and her childhood. So she grew up as a beauty pageant child. Her mom is kind of literally like a Barbie doll. So she's got the blonde hair, she's gorgeous, etc. And she's grown out of beauty pageants. So now she's passed this tradition down to her daughter, Jessica. It's interesting that somebody like Greta would be associated or even married to somebody like Dr. Klink, who's almost like a weird, strange scientist, educator. He has a very large obsession with his study, which is boredom studies. So what's interesting about Monarch in the very beginning is that Jessica is a very typical teenage girl, it seems like. But the thing that kind of draws you into it is that she has mastered this art of being somebody else. So exactly what pageant judges want her to be. So she doesn't seem to have an original face because that's what she's trained to do as somebody who's in the pageant world. So she's basically ready to perform and she's like an empty shell. It's interesting because when we begin, she talks about the pageantry as a child. Like, this is clearly first person. She's regurgitating a story and talking about her childhood. It's like if you're sitting down having coffee with her and she's just telling you what her origin story is. So we begin in that way, and then we go into kind of her teen years. Sprinkled throughout the story, we have little bits of pop culture knowledge, and it mostly focuses on dead girls. So we have things like we talked about Lorena Bobbitt. We talk about the Simpson case as well. We even talk about Columbine. So there's little mentions of these stories and basically how violent media is constantly shown throughout the 80s and the 90s, which is interesting because I too am a millennial. So all of these things, this stimulation from the media, all the things we grew up with, and the things she's talking about, I actually can relate with very well. I understand and remember all of those cases, and I remember even the after effects, how the school system changed, how, just how the news changed, how we changed. It's a whole thing. It really is. It's a whole topic. Speaking of the violence, it's more reinforced when we incorporate old Norwegian folk tales, which most of the time when we do talk about folk tales, it's always trying to be safe or protecting, women or something. Like, women need to be a specific way in order to fit into a particular box and not to be in trouble. And we also have her mom takes Jessica to these things that are kind of like weird Tupperware party, almost like an MLM, and she's demonstrating this thing that's called a plastic cryogenic freezer, and that's to halt the aging process. So she's really obsessed with staying young. If you age and you become this ugly old hag, like, people just abandon you, so that kind of thing. There's also a part with her mom that she has this weird before bed ritual, and she kind of roams around the house with a knife, and it's a little creepy, but it's not blatantly scary. And Jessica, when she's growing up, just kind of assumes that because they are being bombarded with all of this media violence against women and true crime shows, we have all unsolved mysteries. There's always women going missing, women being killed, etc. That maybe that's why her mom is doing this thing, because why not? And honestly, I've actually done that before, especially when I was a kid. Even in the 90s, when my parents would just go to the store, I'd get really scared being alone. So that's one portion of the book. And I haven't even talked about the relationship between Jessica and her father, Dr. Klink. By the way, she only refers to her parents typically by their first names, not like mom or dad. So that can be confusing at times. But then we also have another portion of the book, her babysitter, Christine, and it's funny because she has a babysitter up until her teens. And Jessica says she's not really sure why she still has a babysitter, but she does. Christine is basically like your gothic, witchy, punk aesthetic girl. She knows herself, she's really confident, and gives Jessica a lot of shit for how she's this malleable entity. Christine's actually the person that convinces Jessica to quit pageantry at the age of 13. And that's because her coach is forcing her to sabotage another fellow beauty queen named Veronica Marshall, who is Jessica's first love. So we get a lot of interesting LGBTQ plus relationships, and I really enjoyed that. I thought that was really interesting and very authentic. Yeah, it was really great. Soon after all this happens, Veronica is sent to some mysterious school somewhere, never to really be seen again, which is obviously incredibly upsetting. Jessica ends up going to college, so after the pageantry and etc. She does go to college, but she doesn't do well. She drops out. She has only one vague friend that she's rooming with. So this is where things start to expand a little bit. It's really hard to say what Monarch truly is about, and when they say that Monarch is a kaleidoscopic thriller, it's totally true. So we have lots of information, studies about feminism and growing up as a woman in the 80s and the 90s, especially in the coming of age portion of the story. But then we get into other weird things in the story. How do you know your life is real? Are you in control of your choices? Are the people around you there for you as, they just stumbled upon you and, hey, natural relationship? Or are they plants? Are they there to form you and force you into a certain path? If you don't have memories, you have big blockages of memories, and this applies to everybody, not just sleeper agents out there, by the way. This is everybody. I know I have huge chunks of my memory that aren't available to me. It's really hard to recall. What happens when you don't really have a sense of self? Those are kinds of the questions that are wanting to be answered in the story, and she does a great job. The narrative is very strong. The writing style is super interesting in Monarch. So the last part of the book, it seems very jarring, and I actually like the coming of age portion more than I liked the weird sleeper agent, but it all did kind of come together in a strange way, but it does. But it also leaves you with more questions to ask, but it wasn't bad. Jessica is working part-time at a photography store, and she develops photos that are really similar to JonBenet Ramsey's murder scene. So she starts to recall images of herself with bloody hands. And then that kicks off this next part of the story where she realizes that she was programmed as an agent by this institution named Monarch. And Monarch is basically, they train people to take on different entities. So that's why pageantry, being able to please your judges and take on different personality traits, etc. And this is in order to gather intelligence. Now, this doesn't read like a spy novel necessarily towards the end. We get bits of it, and sometimes it can be incredibly comical or ridiculous, even throughout the book. And I think that's a part of just Jessica and how she is retelling her story. Because holy shit, how crazy is all of this, right? So she makes it palatable, confusing, and honestly, bottom line, getting to a place where she starts to establish her own sense of self, what she actually is. So she was born into a system, and she never saw what it looked like from the outside. It's really interesting, and there is this overarching feeling of discomfort, and it is really unsettling, but it's not your typical creepy novel. It is dystopic. I guess I've been in a dystopic mood. I got through this book very, very, very quickly. And now I just want to go back and read the book to pick up some of those pieces that I might have missed. So for instance, one of those pieces in the coming of age story is that Jessica has always had big gaps in her memory. There's a scene in there, and it was one of my favorite scenes, where she's a kid and the kids all get together and they wear these masks and they just essentially beat each other up. It's weird. It's like Kid Fight Club. Anyway, because she's a beauty queen at this point, why would she do that? She finally gets overwhelmed and needs to go watch this display of the children fighting each other. Now, she keeps asking one of her friends, who she recognizes even though they're wearing a mask, if she's been a participant, and they keep insisting, well, I wouldn't know because everybody's masked. Finally, she goes in and she kicks everybody's ass. And she is a pageant queen who's never had any experience with fights or anything like that, at least as far as she can recall. But there's something eating away at her that keeps her thinking that maybe that is something that is going through her. It's basically like she's experiencing a lot of dissociative memories. She's not there, but she is there. And these memories keep bothering her, but she can never truly figure out if they're real or not. So those are weird scenes, and I remember that scene in particular because I was like, why are these kids fighting each other? But anyway, but I know that if I were to reread the book, those kinds of scenes that are trickled throughout this story would become more defined and apparent, and I think this book just has this, you have to keep going back and reading it. It's surreal. It's a really interesting, poetic, beautiful piece of literature, but admittedly, I don't think this book is for everybody. This book can be incredibly confusing. Candice Wuehle ends up dropping characters into the narrative without any explanation of who they are. It just sometimes you get pulled back and forth in between, in the middle of a story that Jessica is telling, and then all of a sudden we're talking about Norwegian folk tales. Or we're talking about boredom studies that Dr. Klink is doing, or the students, or dead girls missing. It just kind of pulls you back and forth a lot of the time. And I do think you have to pay attention. But for how short of a novel it has so many profound messages. And I think there's even more to be had from it. Speaking of Fight Club, it has a bit of a Chuck Palahniuk feel to this book because it's gritty. It's also pretty and confusing. It could be a very provocative novel. This is a ride. It's hard to describe this novel, but I do recommend it. I do think if you are intrigued at all by the summary, then you probably should pick up the novel because it is more than what it seems. I would say if the summary doesn't grab you or even the cover of the book, then I wouldn't necessarily pick it up. This is definitely a very divisive novel, just how chaotic the story can be. And maybe how cartoonish sometimes things can appear. Sleeper, pageant agent, it sounds ridiculous, right? But it actually is quite a great novel. It also could be a bit pretentious. Hopefully that gives you a little bit of an overview of Monarch by Candice Wuehle. I would give this book a 4 out of 5, but again, I think I need to reread the book. It requires a 2 or 3 time read through because there are just so many elements going on. It's like one of those roller coaster rides that's really long and crazy and wild. Sometimes it's a little slow, but you keep wanting to go back in line, even though there's an entire park around you. That's kind of what this novel's like. So check this out. This is, again, Monarch. This is by Candice Wuehle. If you're looking for more dark reads, make sure to check out our previous podcast episodes. We do curate every single month different books from children, nonfiction, adult fiction, graphic novels, etc. On Fridays, I tend to do minisodes and little deep dives of books I've been reading lately. You can also find us on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and our Amazon live channel. So that's at amazon.com/live/darksideofthelibrary. If you're looking for things that are more than just books, we tend to live stream about the Halloween aesthetic, and we do it all year round. And that includes things like witchy essentials, creepy children's toys, those kinds of things. Come join us. Love to see you. Thank you guys again for listening to this episode. We will see you next time at the Dark Side of the Library.